Hello and welcome back to episode almost 50, more specifically episode 49 of This is the Year, the Swiss AI Engineering Podcast for Builders. And in today's episode, I'm once again joined by Joao. I'll introduce you just in a second to the audience. But in today's episode, we're going to be just deep diving briefly into a potential Anthropic IPO lineup of potential future products they need to still release to increase their ideal valuation. There's a few things I think that are still remain to be discussed. What is next after Mythos, Opus 4.7, Claude Design and Managed Agents? In today's video, we're also quickly discussing the AI Agent Operating Model, or AAIOS, what it actually entails for startups, for AI builders, you guys in the audience, and or how you can actually leverage this huge opportunity to distribute value to your company. And then we do a bit of a news corner on all the news in regard to Cursor. There was some flex routing kerfuffle in regard to Microsoft's data privacy within Europe. And then also a quick deep dive into the AI jobs forecast. But that's that for the later stage of the episode. Let me quickly introduce my guest, as always, today. He is the AI engineering wizard, head of AI, building AI, and is really deep down into the matrix of building multi-agent systems, designing harnesses, using skill engineering, and generally speaking, a great fellow to have on a podcast. How are you doing, Joao, from Lisbon?
That is a bigger introduction than usual. Thank you very much. AI is doing good, and thus I'm doing good as a consequence. I hope that AAIOS is not the final naming scheme. We still have time, I think, to come up with a better one. Collectively, not just on a podcast, but with the audience, because these things are coming to stay, and we better have cool names for it. Otherwise, we'll be forced to say AAIOS for the next, AI cycle, which will last about 5 months. It's still too long to use
every single sales slide, or if you talk to any senior leaders, it's a bit of a tongue breaker if you lead with this particular system. But maybe more on that on the mid segment on today's podcast. Let's quick start it with Anthropic. I'm curious to hear your opinion as well, because ultimately I think we are seeing this pre-IPO, I would say, conversations around these large labs, such as to set the stage and the context. Most likely OpenAI and or Anthropic will go public this year, which means that they're ideally raising a lot of capital. So initially there were some valuations floating around on 800 or so billion on Anthropic. I think the latest news were even showcasing more than $1 trillion for Anthropic during that IPO. This is a liquidation event for many VCs that potentially will be exiting and are really looking to bag the money. But maybe just briefly, Joao, from your perspective, we've seen the lineup on Anthropic. They have a product shipment velocity that is beyond insane, more likely like a startup as opposed to this to a lab per se. And well, they shipped Claude Design most recently. I think that was a huge success as so far. Opus 4.7, Mythos, which is probably too expensive to run. That's why they kind of put it behind and just only ship 4.7. And potentially what is next before this IPO? Is it infrastructure as code? Is it a Gemma 4-like model? Is it even an open source model? Is it a CI/CD type product? Where do you think they might land for the next product before the IPO?
I think Anthropic had a really big start in the coding department. Claude Code became the number one coding agent for everyone, or mostly everyone. And it was such a big market, and it is such a big market. The coding by nature spends a lot of tokens and a lot of compute. And so they weren't in a rush to spread out over markets. They had a really big footing already. Now, I think they're going to generalize as much as possible, capture more and more of the people. Not everyone is writing code. As doesn't matter what your nerd friend says, that maybe everyone should, but most people are using either Office, in their day-to-day, or just writing their notes, doing their own software, their own SaaS. They're using the software that the company has. So there are so much more things and possible more integrations for Claude to have that it is, I think the likely scenario is that they build Claude and they expand Claude to work for the more generalist use cases, so that anyone and everyone can use Claude, not just the coders, not just engineers. Because I think in the engineering department, they're in the lead. They went hard, not only with the tooling, so Claude Code and everything around it, but also the models themselves. Sonnet, Opus, the last 3 versions of Opus were really top 1. If not top 1, then at least top 2 or top 3 in the coding department, in the coding benchmarks. And so they know they have it like that in the bag already. Next case for them, I think it's the generalist use case, the ChatGPT for everyone, but powered by Claude.
So you don't think they're doubling down on like the missing, let's say, if you look at an engineering team, so right, that they more or less shipped, a software engineer with Claude Code, I think they're leading that race as for now. Maybe just in the second stage of the podcast, there was this SpaceX Cursor deal. Cursor has their own proprietary model. I mean, it's rumored to be then also basically leading the coding area called Composer, but more on that just in a second. So that's the software engineering component. Anthropic is mostly leading. The product component probably via, I guess, co-work, or you kind of can patchwork that yourself, now design. So you don't believe they actually are shipping a particular product out of Anthropic Labs, which is basically their incubator in-house of Anthropic for infrastructure topics. But I think that's still the missing building block. Many software engineers are being augmented, but once it's about touching infrastructure like AWS, Azure, GCP, you name it, it's not probably being fully done by an agent, maybe because it's too expensive if something goes wrong. But what's your take on all these infrastructure potential agents?
I think Claude, in a way, already handles a lot of infra. So people use infra as code. You write the code for the infrastructure you want, the servers you want, the services, and how the networking you want it for it to be. All of that in code. Just run the code on your servers, on your inference provider, on your basically cloud provider, and you have the cloud setup. That can and is being done in most places by Claude. The thing is, for them to go the next step over is for them to sell services and servers directly. And I don't think they want to compete with AWS, Microsoft, and Azure, GCP. Like, that's a whole different market that doesn't rely on their biggest strengths, the LLM. It relies on having logistics and networking and a whole lot of infrastructure to sell to people. Azure is big because they have servers everywhere and they've built up client relationships over the past 2 decades. Basically securing a monopoly inside the EU. For Anthropic to do that, I don't think that that'll be their goal. Maybe. I mean, they do have a large amounts of VC money, but I don't think they're gonna go that way. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong. I almost never am, but it could happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's a potential just shift before the IPO that they, as you mentioned, they're quickly targeting the consumer market, although that's kind of the other side of the coin because OpenAI is now targeting the B2B market. So it's kind of a truly unique shift before these IPOs. Of course, we'll be covering all of that here in the podcast. If there is any new announcement from my perspective, I think there might be 1-2 product features or new products still to be shipped by Anthropic Labs. Again, the incubator, if you guys haven't yet checked them out, it's particularly like a team within Anthropic that's basically shipping AI or agentic AI products and or services, aside from, of course, providing LLM capabilities over API and or through your preferred cloud provider. So, Joao, let's quickly talk about to be named still agentic AI operating system, AAIOS, which in essence is, I think, a bit of a new phenomenon that we've seen mostly on startups that are AI native companies. So just to quickly set the stage, if you're an AI native company and you're building on artificial intelligence, you're having a multitude of LLMs anyway for your product and or service. And again, you might be building an agentic AI system for sales, for finance, or you're maybe having something with public infrastructure, marketing, anything in trading, whatever you're doing. Most of the time you're leveraging AI, but for a product and service perspective, and many people, I think they're not really talking about these companies actually leveraging it in-house. So for their in-house procedures, a big benefit if you're a startup, it's of course fairly small and it's moldable. So ultimately, I think that the value proposition of having an AI or AAI operating system essentially is it's really enabling a holistic capability around artificial intelligence and not simply a productivity increase. What do I mean by that? There is every single decision essentially and every single input into the business is kind of running through this agentic artificial intelligence layer. So every single meeting is being recorded, fed into the, let's call it, the OG AI in the middle. Every decision is run by an AI and or fed by and to an AI. Every workflow has AI integration. And it's just really these closed feedback loops that will actually happen within the company. And that ultimately, of course, will lead to basically the shipping velocity that Anthropic has, because Anthropic might be the biggest AI native enterprise on the planet. And we see even at their scale of many, many devs and many, many FTE overall, they can ship insanely fast. And that's most likely due to their internal operating system that's running on their cloud setup. So once again, AI native companies, it's not about increasing productivity only. This is one part of it, but it's really increasing and boosting the entire capability of the entire firm. So one particular person can run an entire engineering department, an entire product department, sales department, GTM, legal department, whatever you want. So it's not really just augmenting the productivity of this one human, but actually the entire capability of old structures that need to be completely re-ramped and rebuilt in these AI native enterprises. What do you think? I have one keyword that I haven't mentioned yet, that it actually needs to make that happen, Joao. What is still missing in many, many of the firms?
Most companies are tied down to their current CRMs and current SaaS that they bought over the last few years, sometimes even decades ago, that they built the workflows around it and they've trained their employees to use it. Their whole company runs around single or a couple systems, platforms that they use. To change that, so there's two things happening. Those platforms are bringing AI integration, but that takes time, and especially because the AI talent is only now becoming more and more prevalent. There are a lot of AI builders, not all of them are good at it. So they are building these AI integrations, and you will see AI in your favorite SaaS and in CRMs. But there's also a new version of CRMs that invert the workflow and have wildly different workflows, specifically because they were built around AI, this AI native software, AI native platforms. I think it's hard for companies to then decide whether they wait a little bit and they get their usual stuff, but slightly better, slightly with more AI. Maybe they can automate a thing or two, or they make the jump and they have to bet on it. Sometimes it can be a bit expensive, and they have a whole new workflow that might not need as many people or as many hours or effort, and you can just migrate everything. Sometimes the learning curve is easy enough to adopt fast, and you just have a whole new company, possibly a much leaner company, because you can have all these systems automated, not because your CRM is better, but because you went for an entirely different pipeline. It is a big risk. I think small companies are easier to make that jump because they're smaller, they're more agile. They don't have to train 135 people to train it on the new software. They have maybe 20 collaborators. Just tell them, hey, this is the new thing, test them out. You can have 5 people try it on a month. If they like it, the next month, all 25 of them will be using it. Bigger companies will take longer. But that's usually the case for everything. Like bigger companies, because of their size, because of their power, and all the FTEs that they employ, take longer to ship and to adapt to new ecosystems. The final thing for AI builders, most cases, the easiest clients to land for your AI native software will be these smaller clients, exactly because they are easier to sell to. They are easier to adapt and adopt your software than to sell to someone like Microsoft or like a really big company, which you'll have multiple rounds of analysis. And if your software somehow doesn't fit their exact criteria, then you're out of the race.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good rundown. I think maybe just to add the last, I would say, bullet point here. I mean, it's really a paradigm shift, right? So I think I've personally, over the last quarter, I've talked to dozens, if not hundreds of companies in around adding AI to existing workflows, which is usually the current understanding. There's some sort of an existing workflow. Hardly anything is really truly digitally documented, and you want to add Copilot to this particular workflow. But I think it needs a paradigm shift away from that thinking that you want to add just Copilot into this rather analog workflow. And the shift needs to happen in the sense that the entire company needs to be queryable. So every single artifact that you are creating and or consuming and then basically iterating on that needs to be queryable in 5 minutes by yet another agent. So every artifact being, for example, a sales artifact, meaning what has been discussed in a sales call, what has been discussed in an engineering call, once the product has been shipped to this, after this sales call, what was the feedback? This needs to be fed back into a queryable format by the agent to then learn from, and they can basically optimize any sprint planning you might have in any of the company's setups. They might optimize the sales pitch and so on and so forth. So every single artifact I'm usually just using as a reference point can be an Excel, a Word, a OneNote, a sprint review document, a line of code, or whatever you actually have, a customer conversation. This needs to be queryable within the firm. So all the agentic middle layer, or this, let's say, agentic intelligence layer, can consume it and then basically take and draw from it to then make better decisions, and not simply, again, patchworking a bunch of AI tools into some process that's completely analog. And you're kind of the only input into the Copilot is you prompting it, and it has no access to nothing else. This is kind of, well, you have an OG engine, but in an old Fiat chassis. So that's a little bit the idea. So you need to upgrade the chassis first, make your firm queryable, make the data available to the agent, and then basically place in the engine in form of large language models. But that's a little bit, once again, this not so fancy word. We try to come up with something better, the AAIOS or AIOS, whatever, AI operating system. But it's really a paradigm shift. It's not a tooling anymore that increases productivity. It's really enabling holistic capability with having a new operating system of your entire enterprise. I think that's what really probably will be materially more being pushed in 2027 and onward, where these agentic layers are really being built. Now let's quickly shift gears to some other in the news element, maybe just 3 to highlight step by step. The Cursor and SpaceX deal, flex routing by Microsoft. I think that was a bit under the radar, but if you were building and Microsoft is your competitor, you probably have that on the radar. And lastly, the AI job impact forecast. So let's tackle first the Cursor SpaceX move. Joao, why is Cursor worth 60 billion? And what does SpaceX have to gain from that? Maybe just to put it into context, XAI is also part of SpaceX.
It is a bit of a consolidation move, which is to be expected. Cursor has reportedly have their own model. They could be using based off some existing open source models, or they could have distilled some frontier closed source models. But supposedly they have a really good coding model, and they've built a really capable tooling harness around that model, which means you can prompt the model to build your software, and it can take your idea, even somewhat abstract idea, and turn it into a real piece of software, either a website, a platform, game. If you want to build those, you can pretty much build anything, and the cost to entry to actually build software and deploy it, so go all the way from an idea to having a website up and running where people can buy and spend money on it, has become incredibly short. If you're a senior developer, maybe it will take you at least a couple days, if not a whole week, to go from your idea to a website, to having a billing system in place, to having something that's not only capable of accepting requests and accepting users, but worthy of it. So it's not just a website saying, hi, I'm John. It's, hi, this is like a real tool you might use and useful for you. Why XAI, or in this case, why SpaceX is buying Cursor? There lives some, I think, at least for me, there's just some ambiguity. I think SpaceX, being what they are, a lot of technology has to be built around code, integrating, having their own coding agent. Cursor, I think, can be quite profitable. So having a profitable company under your umbrella is good to boost your financials all across the board. And you can use a very capable coding agent in-house with a model that you can pair. If SpaceX is basically under the same umbrella as XAI. XAI has a really capable cluster for compute. It's one of the biggest clusters available is from them. And so if you put all of these things together, you can run Cursor at scale inside your own company and basically cut ties and be independent of Claude codes, copilots, or whatever coding agent comes up next.
Yeah, I think it's also perfectly well said. I think on the timing, it also makes sense. I mean, also SpaceX is filing for IPO. Maybe it actually comes out of the races ahead of Anthropic and OpenAI. They didn't need to redo all the filings. I think that's going through as is. And I think they're also more or less just acqui-hiring a really, really capable team that was building Cursor in the first place. I think for me, this deal also signals something for everybody in the audience that's building something. This word is a bit unfancy, a wrapper around LLMs. But now we kind of also have a bit of a, I would say not only the first, but I would say a material estimate of how much these wrappers can actually be worth, right? So it's a $60 billion valuation that SpaceX was offering to Cursor. Of course, there is also a breakup fee. I think they needed to pay at least $10 billion. They basically just outcompeted every other investor on a weekend. But ultimately, once again, what I try to say is if you're building something around large language models, which is pretty much like everybody's doing AI natively, if you're an AI builder, it still has material value, like you mentioned, Joao, including the actual harness they've built, the evaluations or short evals. They might have a tool stack, they might have feedback loops, they might have internal orchestration, handoff, security components, high performance computing, high performance UX, and so on and so forth. So all these things are really materially important, and that's exactly why I think they're offering 60 billion and not 600 million for such an LLM wrapper. Maybe just before we finish the episode today, there was a bit of a I would say under the radar announcement by Microsoft called Flex Routing, just what it means in a nutshell. Before, especially if you're building in Europe, you were always mentioning or you were hearing by clients and or potential competitors, well, we're all using Copilot. It's all sound and safe in terms of data residency. But with this flex routing, potentially what can happen that your data is leaving the EU GDPR region to go to Australia, Canada, or the US. Of course, knowing what you're going to say, Joao, in terms of their compute limitations. But ultimately what that means, especially if you are building in rather sensitive industries, this now is becoming a risk because you constantly need to check if this is turned on and off, if it's actually not happening. And it just adds a lot of work to your compliance department, and you need to have that under control. Before, you were more or less just selecting a region, go as is, and now you have a lot of more, I would say, headaches because of this flex routing. But just before we wrap up the episode, Joao, which one is the reason, do you think, they did flex routing? Because it's definitely not a nice thing to do.
I think Microsoft and I are very similar in the sense that I do not have business level hardware for inference at my disposal. And I think Microsoft also does not have at least enough business level hardware for inference at their disposal, which means their GPUs, they're probably NVIDIA, but maybe sometimes AMD and other brands that will enter a market are not available in Europe. It's harder to set up data centers, cost is higher, regulatory pressure is higher. So it's easier to build in the US. So if they have a compute there, capacity there, it's easier for them to just send the requests there, process them, and then send them back. In terms of latency, it's almost negligible compared to waiting a full 2, 5, 10 seconds for request, then adding 50, 100 milliseconds for that request to go overseas. Not the time that it takes that concerns the most people. I think it's really the compliance and regulatory issues of having your data, sometimes private data, private files, at least part of your private files that are being sent for analysis by an LLM because you ask it what a summary is for that really big PDF you had to read. And now that big PDF is sitting somewhere on a US server. That opens up the conversation. And I think it comes in waves, and every couple months it becomes a viable option again, which is open source models, which not only you can run them in your own hardware or rent hardware within your region to run it, specifically for your capacity, but you have sometimes that inference provided for you already within your region, and you can just pay to use it and use it straight away. And I was telling you, Cyril, that there's one big con and one big pro of using open source models. Do you remember what those were?
I think I was just almost saying I do remember, but I have absolutely no idea what you talked about. so please reiterate. I was prepping my notes for episode 50.
People building with AI. There's one big pro and one big con of using open source AI models. The one big pro is you have an almost unmatchable cost per token from these models. So you have a very equivalent intelligence. Some of these frontier open source models can match in a lot of areas the best of GPTs, the best of Claude models. If not match exactly, it's very much comparable, and it comes off at a much, much lower cost. GPT 5.5, which came out quite recently, Opus 4.7. They're all up there in terms of pricing. I think almost $20 in terms of output tokens,
Yeah,
per million output
$25.
tokens. Yeah, that is not, especially at scale, that becomes quite a problem. And sometimes you don't even have the capacity. Your inference provider won't give you the amount of tokens that you need to run your project. So the one big pro is cheap, smart models. The one big con, however, is longevity. So if you're building on Claude models, you're kind of expecting that every 2-3 months, there'll be a new Claude model. You can just jump ship and build on a new Claude model with almost to no change from your side whatsoever. You should be model agnostic, but if you're working on the same lineup, that means your system will behave mostly the same, but smarter. So you don't have to adjust prompts. You don't have to look out for weird behaviors, weird API changes. You know that everything works out of the box and you get a smarter model automatically if you're using open source already. However, you have to consider that this company might not launch a new model for a while. Open source companies like DeepSeek, the Moonshot AI, the Z.ai, the guys behind the King models and the GLM models, those are big, but those are much more recent than Anthropic or OpenAI are. So you can imagine that if you're building an AI native software, you build on, let's say, GLM 5.1, which is, again, a frontier open source model that you can use right away today and quite good. You don't know what the timeline is to have a GLM 5.2 or 5.5 or GLM 6. GLM might end as a lineup, and you might have to jump to a new open source model from the Quen lineup, from Alibaba, or a DeepSeek model. So as you can see, it creates some uncertainty. And that's the biggest con, which is longevity and model upgrades are possible and definitely probable, but less consistent, I'd say.
I mean, it's probably, you have to take that into consideration on the model evaluation vectors, right? So it's either you take more time to iterate on your product once a new model is coming out, or you can immediately just update it with 4 or 5 lines of code, but then you have to pay the premium in terms of cost. So I think it's certainly pluses and minuses. So before we wrap up the episode, maybe I'll just leave you in the audience maybe with two ideas to maybe simmer around, and we try to rewrap them up maybe in episode 50. First of all, is this question on Mythos. I think we were also discussing that this was released or not released based on cybersecurity concerns. If you ask me now, maybe a few days after the release, I think it's mostly due to what you just mentioned before. They simply do not have the compute. It's a fairly expensive model to run, even for them. And most likely they were just basically releasing it with all the capabilities, but at this very closed user group, which might be, once again, still a new model category, very hand-picked customers that you basically give this super intelligence, and only a few of these enterprises have actually access to, and they pay an insane premium, and that basically then just justifies. But on the other side, you probably can't run that on your current existing compute clusters because it will take away all the compute you would need for Opus 4.7. So that's a little bit maybe something to simmer around. Is it cybersecurity? Is it compute constraint? Probably the latter. And the second I was teasing at the very beginning of the episode, the AI job impact forecast. I think there is more and more data sources coming in, just from Gartner, for example. I can put it on the screen just for references, that we are a bit in the J curve as well in regards to jobs being gained and being lost due to AI. And there's still some forecast and hope around that, at least based on the chart that I'm looking at, that mid-2029, the net gain due to AI will be outpacing the net loss due to AI. But once again, it's an idea to simmer in, and maybe we can pick it up in episode 50 on This Is the Year. So there's still a lot of conundrum. Once again, is AI losing jobs net, or is actually AI gaining jobs net? Certainly everybody will be increasing capability if you have an AAIOS at your company. So that's it, episode 49. Thank you, Joao, for joining. For you guys in the audience, generally speaking, if we are not late by uploading due to over-engineering and lack of sleep, shooting these episodes every single week, and usually we upload on the second half of each and every single week. So that being said, thank you, Joao, for joining from Lisbon. See you in Lisbon next week, and take care, everybody in the audience. Bye-bye.
See you next week.